Today, we're going to be talking about subject-verb agreement. We've talked before about what a subject is and what a verb is, but as a quick reminder, the subject of the sentence is the person or thing performing an action, and the verb is the word describing the action state or occurrence of the subject. Subjects and verbs have to agree with one another in number. That means that if a subject is singular, the verb used with it must also be singular. Just so, if a subject is plural, the verb must be plural. Let's unpack that. Singular means just one of the person, animal, or thing that the noun refers to. For example, a single dog, train, or man. Plural means multiple of the person, animal, or thing in question. For example, multiple dogs, trains, or men. Take a look at the following sentence and try to determine whether or not it has proper subject-verb agreement. The dog chased the cat. Does something feel off with that sentence? Well, you're right. Dog is singular, but the verb chase is actually a plural verb. In the present tense, nouns and verbs form plurals in opposite ways. Nouns add an S when they are plural, and verbs remove an S. Conversely, if a noun is singular, it drops the S, and if a verb is singular, it needs an S. So this sentence should actually read, the dog chases the cat, or the dogs chase the cat. What if it gets a little bit more complicated? What if you have a sentence like this? She and her friends are at the fair. The verb in this sentence is the word are, which is a plural verb used with plural nouns such as the fish are swimming or the eggs are hatching. But as you can see, we have two subjects in this sentence, she and her friends. When the subject of the sentence is made up of two or more nouns connected by the word and, you always use a plural verb. Think of it this way. The and lumps the two subjects into a group, making them a multiple, which would then be plural. Now, what if the two subjects are joined by something other than the word and? Say the word or, for example. Take a look at this sentence. The book or the pen is in the drawer. The word or tells us that it's not both things together that we're talking about. It's one or the other. Since both book and pen are singular nouns, we should use the singular verb is, not the plural are. Using a plural verb in a situation like this is a common mistake. Just remember, when two or more singular nouns are connected by the word or, always use a singular verb. Let's take a look at one more fun complication. The boy or his friends run every day. In this sentence, the two subjects are joined by the word or, but one of them is singular, boy, and one of them is plural, friends. How do you choose which of these to match with a verb? It's easy, actually. When a compound subject contains both a singular and a plural noun or pronoun joined by or, the verb just agrees with the part of the subject that is closest to it. So in the sentence we looked at, we used run, the plural form of the verb, because friends is plural. If we rearrange the sentence, we would have to change the verb as follows. His friends or the boy runs every day. Don't be misled by phrases that come between the subject and the verb. The verb has to agree with the subject, remember? Well, sometimes other pronouns or nouns can look like they are the subject, and then it gets tricky. For example, why does the following sentence use a singular verb instead of a plural one? One of the boxes is open. The subject isn't boxes, even though the word boxes does happen to be closest to the verb. The subject is one, and one is singular. What about this one? The team captain, as well as his players, is anxious. Should you make the verb agree with captain, which is singular, or players, which is plural? Well, since you see the word is, you already know the answer. The subject is the team captain, so the verb has to be singular. The part of the sentence about the players is parenthetical and not the subject. To recap, it's important to make sure your subject and verb agree. That just means that if you have a plural subject, you have to use a plural verb, and if you have a singular subject, you have to use a singular verb.
The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. This silly sentence contains all of the letters of the alphabet, and you might notice it also is stuffed full of adjectives. In this video, we'll talk about what adjectives are and how to use them in a sentence. An adjective is a word that describes a noun. It describes something's size, color, age, origin, material, or shape. Adjectives can be used to make the subject simpler to understand and to shed light on what an author wants their ideas to truly convey. The adjectives used in the sentence about the fox and the dog are quick and brown, describing the fox, and lazy, which describes the dog. Here's another example. She is the smartest student in the class. Student is the noun, and smartest is describing what kind of student she is. So smartest is the adjective. Shakespeare has been credited for adding hundreds of new words to the English language when he was writing, and many of those were adjectives. Some examples of Shakespearean adjectives are, "Thou cold-blooded slave, hast thou not spoke like thunder on my side, been sworn my soldier, bidding me depend upon thy stars, thy fortune and thy strength, and dost thou now fall over to my fours?" Cold-blooded is an adjective that describes the slave. It helps us to know what type of person the slave was. Cold-blooded is a word that had been used to describe snakes and reptiles, but Shakespeare used it for the first time to describe a person. Here's an example from the book Little Women. She remembered her mother's promise and, slipping her hand under her pillow, drew out a little crimson-covered book. Crimson-covered describes the color of fabric that was covering the book. As you can see, using adjectives can make your sentences and ideas come to life. Instead of just saying that the firework display was beautiful, you can make it much more exciting and easier to envision what the fireworks actually looked like by saying, "The fireworks this year were bursting brightly overhead as the bright, dazzling sparkles lit up the sky." Bright and dazzling are just two of the many, many adjectives that make writing so descriptive and fun to read.
Describing situations in detail helps readers more vividly understand what is taking place. When describing things in more detail, adverbs are a helpful addition to make your sentences more colorful and portray the event clearly. In this video, we'll take a look at what adverbs do, how to identify them, and how to best use them in our writing. The easiest way to find an adverb in a sentence is to ask these questions. Where was something done? When was it done? How was it done? And to what extent was it done? An adverb will always answer one of those questions. For example, the adverb here answers the question, where? And the adverb randomly answers the question, how? An easy identifier for adverbs is the suffix ly. Not all adverbs use it, but the majority of adverbs do. Let's identify some adverbs by using our 4 questions. She went outside and walked the dog. Do any of those words in the sentence answer the question where, when, how, or to what extent? In this example, we see that outside is the adverb because it tells us where she went. Let's look at another. They briskly jogged through the park. Here, we see that the word briskly answers the question how something was done, making it the adverb in the sentence. Let's try one more example. She almost tripped while jogging, but regained her balance. This one might be tricky. In this example, we see that almost describes the extent to which something happens, which in this case was tripped. She almost tripped, making almost the adverb here. Adverbs not only modify verbs, they are also used to describe comparisons of 2 things. Adverbs have 3 degrees of comparison: positive, comparative, and superlative. The best way to explain positive, comparative, and superlative adverbs is to think of them as well, better, and best. When we want to describe the quality of something, we can say the thing itself is done well. That would be a positive adverb. We may compare that thing to something else and say, this thing is better than something else, which is known as a comparative adverb. Or we may simply say, this thing is the best, which is superlative. As you can see, with each comparison, the degree of its descriptor is increased. There are many ways of changing adverbs from positive to comparative and superlative. Let's go over each one with real examples and see how they differ. What's important to note about positive adverbs is that the words used don't necessarily have to be positive or good words. For example, the word badly is a positive adverb because it is the first or basic degree you can use to describe something without comparing it to anything else. Many adverbs can be modified to show different degrees by simply adding er or est to the end of the word. Adding er to a word makes it comparative, meaning It's not the most of something, but it is more than something else. Adding est to the end of a word means that the word it is describing is the most of something, and nothing can be compared as being better than it. Here's an example. He ran through the field faster than his sister. In this example, the adverb faster responds to the question of how something was done. We also know this is a comparative adverb because of the added er to the end of fast. This lets us know that this person ran at a higher speed compared to his sister. Here's another example. She was the quickest of everyone who ran the 5K. Here we see the adverb quickest answers the question of how something was done. Because there is an est at the end of quick, we know that this adverb is superlative because no one else ran more quickly than this person. Some adverbs, especially those that end in ly, can't have their degrees increased to comparative or superlative forms by simply adding er or est to the end. These adverbs must have more and most preceding the word to be modified. Let's look at a few examples. The crowd cheered for her more joyfully than for the other performers. Here we can see that joyfully is the adverb because it answers the question of how the crowd cheered. We can also see that joyfully is a comparative adverb because of the word more before it. With this, we know that the crowd cheered more, but not the most joyfully. He completed his task most efficiently of all the employees. Again, in this example, the adverb efficiently is easy to spot, not only because it ends in ly, but because it answers the question of how the task was performed. We also find the word most preceding efficiently, which means this is a superlative adverb and no task was completed more efficiently than his. Some adverbs can't be made comparative and superlative with the use of er, est, more, or most. For irregular adverbs, changing their degree of comparison means changing the word and its spelling entirely. There is no special trick to these irregular adverbs, so they must be memorized over time to understand their implied degree of comparison. The word badly is an example of an irregular adverb. To make it comparative, you wouldn't say more badly or badlier. The comparative form of badly is worse, and the superlative form is worst. Other examples of irregular adverbs include little, which becomes less and least, and good, which becomes better and best. Now, let's look at adverbial phrases. Adverbial phrases perform the same function as adverbs and describe when, how, to what extent, and where something happens. What makes them different from normal adverbs is they are phrases, which means they are a group of two or more words and they don't always contain a typical ly adverb in the phrase. Here are some examples that answer the question, when. He goes camping every summer. They are going to sleep earlier than usual. Here, these highlighted phrases signify a time in which something occurs. In this sentence, he was driving haphazardly and recklessly. This adverbial phrase is made up of two adverbs and a conjunction to make a phrase that describes how something occurred. An adverbial clause is similar to an adverbial phrase. However, adverbial clauses, just like the name suggests, are clauses, which means they contain a subject, verb, and subordinating conjunction. Let's look at some examples. Sit at the table until your food is eaten. In this example, the adverbial clause, until your food is eaten, describes when something occurs. We also know it is a clause because it has a subject, food, and verb, eaten, as well as a subordinating conjunction, until. My sister, although she was hungry, wouldn't eat until I arrived. Here, the adverbial clause starts with a subordinating conjunction, although has a subject, she, and a verb, is. Together, they describe the extent to which the sister wouldn't eat. Make sure you are polite to people wherever you go. This example shows the subordinating conjunction wherever, the subject you, and verb go to show when something happened. Before we go, let's do a little practice to refresh what we've learned. Number 1, which of the following are not adverbs? A, entirely, B, rather, C, them, or D, cautiously. The answer is C, them. The word them is a pronoun. Number 2, the highlighted word is an example of what? Some people agree that Serena Williams is the greatest athlete of all time. A, adverbial phrase. B, subordinating conjunction. C, comparative adverb. Or D, superlative adverb. The answer is D, superlative.
Prepositions are words that specify how something is related to something else in time and space. They work in a sentence to connect nouns or pronouns with other words and elements. Let's start with this example. The dog swam in the lake. There are two nouns in this sentence, dog and lake. We know from the verb swam what the dog is doing, but we need the preposition in to tell us where the swimming is happening. The dog is swimming in something, and that something is the lake. The second noun connected with the preposition, in this case the word lake, is called the object of the preposition, and together with the preposition forms a prepositional phrase. There is no subject in the phrase in the lake, only a noun. Because of the preposition in, we know it's a prepositional phrase. This is an article, not a noun, so we know it can't be the object of the preposition. Lake, the noun we are trying to connect with our first noun, dog, is the object of the preposition. Most of the time, though, not always, the object of the preposition comes after the preposition in the prepositional phrase. When we're trying to find the prepositional phrase in a sentence, first try to spot the preposition. Prepositions show direction, location, or time. Many of the most common prepositions are small words you use every day. At, by, for, from, in, of, on, to, and with are all prepositions. Think about this sentence and try to pick out the prepositional phrase. After work, Joe drove to the store in his car. There are three prepositional phrases in this sentence. Let's start with a simple one. Joe, the proper noun, is connected to the noun store by the preposition to. It answers a directional question. Where did Joe go? He went to the store. The word store is the object of the prepositional phrase to the store. Let's look for another preposition in this sentence. You might have noticed our preposition in appeared again in this sentence. In isn't a directional preposition like to, but it tells us where Joe was during his drive. He was in his car. Car is the object of the preposition in, and in his car is the prepositional phrase. Now, let's look back to the first word in the sentence, after. This is also a preposition. Remember, prepositions show direction, location, or time. After dinner is a prepositional phrase that tells us when Joe went to the store. Dinner is the object of the preposition. Not all prepositional phrases are quite so simple. Think of it like a sandwich. You have to have bread and filling to make a sandwich, right? A sandwich can be as simple as cheese between two slices of bread, but it can also have meat, veggies, and spreads. We can jazz up prepositional phrases the same way with adjectives and adverbs. As long as you still have the bread and the filling, preposition and object of the preposition, you'll still have a prepositional phrase. Take this sentence, for example. The swallows flew over the trees near the lake. Over the trees and near the lake are the two prepositional phrases in this sentence. Over is a preposition that tells us the direction the swallows flew, and near is a preposition that tells us where the trees were located. These prepositional phrases are fairly simple, but look what happens if we make the sandwich more interesting. The swallows flew over the dark trees near the town's renowned lake. We still have the same two prepositions and prepositional phrases, but the words dark, towns, and renowned are all adjectives. Dark is modifying or adding meaning to the object, trees, of the first prepositional phrase, but it is otherwise not changing the preposition in any way. The same is true of towns and renowned. They are modifying the object of the preposition lake. In the second phrase, near is still the preposition and lake is still the object of the preposition. So let's recap. A preposition is a word that answers the question when or where something happened in a sentence. It connects nouns or pronouns to other nouns in the sentence. About, to, with, up, down, under, inside, after, before, and for are a few examples of common prepositions. The object of the preposition is the noun that the preposition is talking about, and together with the preposition, those objects make prepositional phrases. Words are divided into different categories depending on their use and function. These categories are what we like to call the parts of speech. There are 8 parts of speech in the English language: nouns, pronouns, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, conjunctions, prepositions, and interjections. Today, we'll actually be talking about gerunds, participles, and infinitives. Now, you're probably wondering how those are related to the parts of speech, right? Well, for the sake of understanding these concepts, just think of those 3 as various ways in which the different parts of speech can be used. In other words, the main parts of speech are your tools, and our 3 topics for today are the projects you need the tools for. A gerund is a word that is created with a verb but functions as a noun, always ending in ing. Being used as a noun, a gerund can function as a subject complement, a direct object, an indirect object, or an object of a preposition. It's important to note that though gerunds may look a lot like present participles, they are not the same thing. Gerunds are specifically placed in the noun position of a sentence, whereas present participles are placed with the verb phrase, usually as modifiers. Here is an example of a gerund in the subject position. Brushing your hair prevents it from tangling. In this sentence, the word brushing is the gerund functioning as the subject of the sentence. If a gerund were to be the complement of a subject in a sentence, it would look like this. Her number 1 priority is working. Working is functioning as a complement to the subject, priority. Here's an example where the gerund is the object of a preposition. There is no use in standing in the line for 3 hours, Grandma said. In this sentence, standing follows the preposition in, making it the object of the preposition. Gerunds can also function as the object of a sentence. Very similar to gerunds are participles. Participles are words created from verbs that are then used as adjectives to modify nouns in a sentence. They can also be used as introductions to adverbial phrases. There are present and past participles. Present participles always end in ing and correlate to events taking place in the current tense. The past participle can be either regular or irregular and refers to events that have already happened. Differentiating between participles and gerunds can be a little tricky sometimes because participles can actually function as gerunds. For our purposes today, we're going to take a look at some rather straightforward examples. When using a participle as an adjective, you might come across a sentence like this. The browning fruit should be put outside for composting. Browning is a present participle, noted by the ing ending, that is modifying the noun fruit. I spent the whole day studying math. In this sentence, studying is a present participle that is working as the beginning of an adverbial phrase in the sentence. The phrase studying math is modifying the verb spent. How did I spend the whole day? Studying math. Both of those examples were present participles, meaning the words ended in ing to denote something happening in the current time. As mentioned, there are such things as past participles. Past participles can have varied word endings depending on the word being used. Most commonly, you will see d or ed added to the end of a word. Let's look at a couple of examples. The windows were cracked when the rainstorm came through. Here, the word cracked is the past participle working as an adjective to modify the noun windows. He continued forward, cautioned by the desolate streets. Cautioned is the past participle in this sentence, functioning as the beginning of an adverbial phrase describing the word continued. Additionally, participles can also appear as multi-part verbs. The multi comes from attaching an auxiliary verb or helping verb to the main verb being used in the sentence. Joanne was baking fresh cookies for her grandkids. In this sentence, only one helping verb is used, was. It is paired with the participle baking to create a multi-part verb. Joanne has been baking all morning. The helping verb in the sentence has been participle baking. Joanne would have been reading all morning if her grandkids hadn't said they were coming over. Helping verb would have been participle reading. Knowing how to form different endings of the participles allows for a variety of meanings to be conveyed. Unlike gerunds and participles, infinitives do not change their endings. They are always in the simple singular form. Infinitives are singular verbs usually preceded by the word to. They do not have any specific suffixes, they're just simple in nature. In other words, the verbs are unconjugated. Infinitives can be used as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb. Most likely, when you're dealing with infinitives, you'll be dealing with the present infinitive. That's what we'll be looking at today. The to is used with the infinitive to show the purpose of something or maybe to express someone's opinion. Let's take a look at some examples of infinitives. Noun, Josh wants to study as soon as he gets home from school. Adjective, today she wants to show Josh a new game to play. Adverb, Josh played the new game with his sister instead of studying to make her happy. We've discussed quite a bit today. Remember, gerunds are words that are formed from verbs and used as nouns, always ending in ing. Participles are words created from verbs that can be used as adjectives or an adverbial phrase, also ending in ing, unless expressing past tense. And infinitives are verbs that take the simple tense and follow the preposition to.
Hey guys, welcome to this video on sentence structure. In this video, we'll learn about the different types of sentences so you can make sure your writing is interesting and engaging to the reader. Listen to this paragraph. Daniel went to the grocery store. He wasn't sure if it had any more fresh apples. The store did not have any apples. Daniel was very sad. Apples are Daniel's favorite food. How did this paragraph sound to you? Monotonous, boring, and uninteresting, right? How about this version? Daniel went to the grocery store, but he wasn't sure if it had any more fresh apples. Much to his dismay, the store did not have any apples, and Daniel was distraught. After all, apples are Daniel's favorite food. Sounds a lot better, right? While there are many differences between these two paragraphs, the main difference is that the first used the same simple type of sentence throughout, while the second used many different types of sentences in order to enhance the content. The first type of sentence we're going to look at is a simple sentence, which consists of both a subject and predicate and can stand independently as its own sentence. A simple sentence is essentially the same thing as an independent clause. Let's look at an example. The old car survived the drive across the country despite the weather conditions. There's only one independent clause with the subject, the old car, and the predicate, survived the drive across the country despite the weather conditions. Let's move on to the second type of sentence, compound sentences. A compound sentence consists of two independent clauses joined together by a conjunction. Here's an example. Max drove to the store and Ben picked up the girls. Note that there are two independent clauses here that could stand alone as sentences. You could just as easily write, Max drove to the store. Ben picked up the girls. But we've joined these two independent clauses together by using the conjunction and. Another example would be, with all the heavy traffic, Josh was able to get home in time for dinner, but Ariana was stuck on the busy freeway. The first independent clause is, Josh was able to get home in time for dinner. And the second is, Ariana was stuck on the busy freeway. The two clauses are joined by the conjunction but. The beginning of the sentence, with all the heavy traffic, is a prepositional phrase and does not have any bearing on this type of sentence. The third type of sentence is a complex sentence, which consists of one independent clause with the addition of one or more dependent clauses. Let's look at an example. After she took the time to clean her room, Sarah could finally play with her new dollhouse. The first part of the sentence, after she took the time to clean her room, is a dependent clause. More information is needed for it to serve as its own independent sentence. The second part of the sentence, Sarah could finally play with her new dollhouse, is an independent clause because it has a subject and predicate and can stand alone as a sentence. The last type of sentence is a compound complex sentence. This type of sentence contains two independent clauses as well as a dependent clause. An example would look something like this. Before the treehouse is used for the first time, all the beams need to be checked and the ladder must be connected. The two independent clauses are, all the beams need to be checked and the ladder must be connected. They are combined using the conjunction and. The start of the sentence, before the treehouse is used for the first time, is a dependent clause since it has a subject, the treehouse, and a predicate, is used for the first time, but cannot stand independently as its own sentence.
Authors write from a point of view based on their desired impact. Do they want to speak directly to the audience? Do they want to speak through a character? You, the audience, can determine the point of view by the personal pronouns the author uses. In this video, we'll discuss first person, second person, and third person points of view. We'll start with first person. Authors who write in the first person use the personal pronouns I or we. The use of the personal pronoun helps connect the author with the reader. It's as if the author were relaying a personal anecdote just to you. As a result, the reader feels a closeness and an emotional connection. Let's take a look at some of the more famous first-person passages. When he was nearly 13, my brother Jem got his arm badly broken at the elbow. That's the opening line of the Harper Lee classic To Kill a Mockingbird. The book's adult narrator, Jean Louise Scout Finch, recalls her time as a child growing up in a small Alabama town during the Great Depression and how her father defended a black man unjustly accused of raping a white woman. Her narration begins with a vivid imagery, and the reader quickly empathizes with these two young children. That line helps make the connection authors seek when writing in the first person. Here's one more. After supper, she got out her book and learned me about Moses and the bulrushers. She let out that Moses had been dead a long time, so then I didn't care no more about him because I don't take no stock in dead people. That's Huck Finn speaking in the Mark Twain classic. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn tells the 19th century adventures of a boy, Huck Finn, who travels the Mississippi River with a runaway slave. His sort of first-person narration contains a unique dialect meant to mirror the way people spoke in those days, but it serves the same purpose. Using the dialect gives the reader a closer connection to Huck Finn and his friend Jim. So that's first-person dialogue. There's another type of point of view that isn't widely used, but it's worth exploring. Let's take a look at second person. There's a grocery store across the street that you can go to. When authors use the second person pronoun you, they're writing from a second person point of view. You is very informal, so researchers tend not to use the second person in academic writing. But this informal writing can be very helpful in a number of other genres. Let's take a look at a few. Cookbooks make great use of the second person point of view. Recipes tend to be very informal, with phrases like, once you have mixed the eggs, you'll need to mix in the flour. Instruction manuals make liberal use of the second person. After you drill the hole into the stud, you can use the anchor to secure the television wall mount. Self-help books also use the second person. You can take control of your life by following these steps, or you should breathe deeply during this exercise. Those are phrases that you might see. You'll also see the second person in advertising and quotes. Former President John F. Kennedy spoke in the second person during what is arguably one of the most famous lines in American history. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Remember the advertising slogan, "Have it your way"? That's the second person style. Let's look at the third person. He, she, they, it. Those are examples of third person pronouns. There, themselves, himself, and itself are also included. The third person narrative comes from the point of view of the subject. He always hated shopping for clothes is an example of the third person. The third person has 3 different types. The first we're going to look at is third person limited. In this style, the narrator knows what one character thinks and feels. There are a number of reasons to use third person limited writing in literature. Mystery novels use a single character to unravel clues, and they do so without knowing what other characters think. Authors use the third person to show how events develop through the eyes of one character. Authors also use the third person to show how the narrative can change, or that the character's initial point of view was flat out wrong. Here's an example. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansion, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. That's the opening paragraph of George Orwell's 1984, setting the scene through the eyes of one character, Winston Smith. Even in that one paragraph, you can see the third person pronouns, his, chin, along with him. While third person limited tells the tale through the eyes of one character, third person multiple goes further. The author switches the perspective and scene from one character to another, always narrating from a specific point of view. It's a difficult art to master because authors must remember that one character doesn't know what the other one thinks or feels. The next point of view, third person omniscient, is more widely used. Omniscient means knowing everything or all-knowing, and in this case, the author knows what all the characters think and can show that to the reader. With this method, authors can compare the thoughts and feelings of the characters. This method can show tension between characters, provide a point of view of events, and contrast actions so that the audience can form its own opinion. In Little Women, author Louisa May Alcott uses a narrator who knows how all of the book's characters think and act. In this passage, the omniscient narrator paints a scene with the 4 March daughters, Beth, Meg, Amy, and Jo. At 9, they stopped work and sang, as usual, before they went to bed. No one but Beth could get much music out of the old piano, but she had a way of softly touching the yellow keys and making a pleasant accompaniment to the simple songs they sang. Meg had a voice like a flute, and she and her mother led the little choir. Amy chirped like a cricket, and Jo wandered through the airs at her own sweet will, always coming out at the wrong place with a croak or a quaver that spoiled the most pensive tune. In this case, it's clear the narrator knows everything about the characters.
Separating fact from opinion can be a difficult task. In this video, we will discuss the distinction between fact and opinion and offer some helpful tips for distinguishing between the two. A fact is a statement that can be proven to be true by the use of evidence. Factual statements are true in all cases and for all people. In other words, facts are universal. Some examples include dogs are mammals. Albany is the capital of New York. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on Earth. Each of these statements is true. Furthermore, each statement is verifiable and not debatable, provided that definitions are agreed upon. Put simply, evidence exists that could potentially prove or disprove each claim. Opinions, unlike facts, are neither true nor false. An opinion can express a belief, attitude, value, judgment, or feeling. Some examples include, dogs are the best mammals in existence. Albany is the most interesting city in New York. World War II was a terrible war. Each of these statements expresses an opinion. Note that each is debatable. In other words, one can potentially agree or disagree with. Debate, a statement of opinion. Note that the final statement, World War II was a terrible war, strikes many of us as factual. However, this is a statement of opinion. Yes, most people would consider World War II terrible. However, there is always the possibility that somebody out there holds a different opinion, as strange as they may seem. It is very rare for a statement with a value word like terrible to be factual. Now that we know the differences between a fact and an opinion, it's important to know how to distinguish between them when reading literature. Let's look at some helpful strategies. Watch for opinion masked as fact. A lot of times, professional or technical language can seem factual. In particular, you'll want to watch out for predictions. Predictions are opinions since they cannot be verified in the present. This is even true if the prediction is being expressed by an expert with an informed opinion. A zoologist who predicts that a particular animal will go extinct in 50 years, for example, is stating an informed opinion. This opinion is based on evidence, research, and expertise, but because it cannot be presently confirmed, it is not a fact. Value or judgment words often signal an opinion. LeBron James is very tall is a statement most people would agree with. However, the word very makes this problematic. What exactly does it mean to be very tall? It is not defined. What one person considers very tall, another may consider average or even short. The word very is an example of a value or judgment word. Here's a list of value and judgment words. If you see one of these in a statement, then the view being expressed is likely an opinion. Look for words like should or ought to. These words usually suggest a course of action or give advice. Though this advice may be advisable, it is rarely factual. No matter how much we agree with a should statement, it is by its very nature opinion. For instance, one should avoid smoking cigarettes. May be sound advice with a lot of supporting evidence, but it is still an opinion. Smoking cigarettes can cause a variety of health ailments, on the other hand, can be verified and is therefore factual. In essence, facts can be verified by evidence, and opinions are statements of belief, attitude, value, judgment, or feeling. Before we go, let's look at a quick review question. Which of the following statements is factual? A. Ohio is a beautiful state. B. You should never drive faster than the speed limit. C. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Or D. George Washington was a great public speaker. The answer is C. This is the only option that can be backed up by evidence.
Have you ever put down a book and wondered, what in the world did that mean? Chances are the author didn't have a clearly defined theme worked out, or didn't execute it well. A literary theme is the unifying or dominant idea in a work of fiction. This is not to be confused with the plot. The theme is the main topic or central idea. This can be as simple as love, family, or revenge. It can be as complicated as science versus nature, the folly of youth, or the treachery of commerce. Every writer makes his or her writing about something, and that something, the essence of the story, is the theme. For example, a major theme in Great Expectations is that moral values are more important than wealth and status. Alienation is a primary theme in Crime and Punishment, while true love triumphs dominates the well-loved classic Princess Bride. What good does it do to know major themes? We've already pointed out how a story without a uniting theme is often confusing and leaves the reader wanting more. Well, learning about themes isn't just a way to better analyze an author's finished work of fiction. It's also a way to improve your own writing. The stronger a writer's theme is, and the more in tune the writer is with that theme's execution, the better the work as a whole will be. For your own written work, ask yourself, what under all the characters and subplots is my story really about? Is it about love conquering all, about good triumphing over evil, about the dangers of progress? Often, your story will have a spine. This is a one-sentence description of the heart behind your book. For example, one could say the spine of Pride and Prejudice is a man and woman during the Regency era overcome their preconceptions to ultimately find love. While two major themes are matrimony and, you guessed it, prejudice. This might sound too simple, but that's okay. The theme is supposed to be an oversimplification of the story's meaning. Once you've defined your theme and the spine of your story, it's helpful to look at all your characters, situations, and plot developments through this lens. Say your theme is love fails in the end. Even at the happiest moments of your love story, it might be wise to include some foreshadowing of love's imminent doom. This helps enrich your writing. Two of the primary ways to build a theme in writing are through motifs and symbols. A motif is a recurring literary structure that helps develop your theme. It's a meaningful pattern that reuses objects, characters, even weather, to further emphasize the theme. For example, in The Great Gatsby, changing weather patterns reflect the shifting tone of the story. The weather is overwhelmingly hot when characters feel suffocated by a situation. Tension is connected to storms, and the day of Gatsby's funeral, it's pouring rain. A symbol is like a motif, but on a smaller scale. It's an image, character, or object that has a meaning beneath the immediate surface. Let's stick with The Great Gatsby in our explanation. In the novel, Gatsby is still in love with a former flame, Daisy. He's come up in the world since their last meeting and now lives across the lake from her in an enormous mansion. Daisy has a green light on the edge of her dock, and Gatsby watches that light from the edge of his own dock. This is an example of symbolism. There's nothing to suggest Gatsby is particularly infatuated with green lights, but for him, the light symbolizes Daisy, who seems to him unattainable. In summary, a literary theme is different than a plot. While a plot is the order of events in a work of fiction, the theme involves the overall meaning and purpose of the book. The theme is where fiction intersects with life. It may be a story about hobbits in Middle-earth, but the theme of friendship and good conquering evil is still applicable to real life.
Some may think poetry is just a way of confusing people. And yes, while it can oftentimes be more difficult to understand than a novel, my hope is that after this video, you'll have a better appreciation for poetry and may be able to actually enjoy it. Today, we're going to be working through the structure of poetry from largest to smallest. Let's begin with the superstructure of a poem, the form. According to the Poetry Archive, form in poetry can be understood as the physical structure of the poem, the length of the lines, their rhythms, their system of rhymes, and repetition. In this sense, it is normally reserved for the type of poem where these features have been shaped into a pattern, especially a familiar pattern. That is, there are many different kinds of poems, some of which don't really have any regular patterns. Many, however, do follow a pattern, especially classical and ancient poems. You may have heard of the term stanza. A stanza is a grouping of lines within a poem. The author of Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, was also a poet. His poem, The Crocodile, has 2 stanzas of 4 lines each. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. Another type of poem is an acrostic, where the first letter of each line spells something. Isaac Watts, who was born in 1674, wrote an acrostic that spelled out his name when he was just 7 years old. I'm a vile, polluted lump of earth, so I've continued ever since my birth. Although Jehovah grace does daily give me, as sure this monster Satan will deceive me. Come, therefore, Lord, from Satan's claws relieve me. Wash me in thy blood, O Christ, and grace divine impart. Then search and try the corners of my heart, that I in all things may be fit to do service to thee and sing thy praises too. Moving smaller, let's discuss patterns within lines. One of these patterns is feet, which is related to meter. In poetry, a foot is a basic repeated sequence of meter composed of 2 or more accented or unaccented syllables. The accent is where the emphasis falls on the word, as in when you put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. There are 4 primary feet: iambic, as in the word destroy; anapestic, as in the word intervene; trochaic, as in the word topsy; and dactylic, as in the word merrily. A common foot and line length combination is iambic pentameter, which was generally how Shakespeare wrote. This means there are 5 unaccented or accented feet per line. Line length generally varies from 1 foot to 8 feet. You're forgiven if you're thinking I'm talking about buying lumber. Now, we get another layer smaller, with the structure of individual words known as meter. Paul Fussell, in his crucial book on poetry, defines meter as what results when the natural rhythmical movements of colloquial speech are heightened, organized, and regulated so that repetition emerges from the relative phonetic haphazard of ordinary utterance. Let's unpack that. What Fussell is talking about is organizing words so that they have a rhythm to them, like a song has rhythm. Think of a basic drum beat. In English, we accent words, which means that some syllables receive more emphasis than others. This creates opportunity to create rhythm. According to the Purdue OWL, there are 4 common ways to view meter: syllabic, a general counting of syllables per line; accentual, a counting of accents only per line. Syllables may vary between accents; accentual syllabic, a counting of syllables and accents; and quantitative, which measures the duration of words. So we've discussed the major structure of a poem, the lines and the words. Now let's talk about the smallest structural element of poetry, rhyming. According to the Poetry Foundation, a rhyme is the repetition of syllables, typically at the end of a verse line. And just to be confusing, there are several different types of rhymes. Eye or visual rhymes, which are words that look similar but are not pronounced similarly, as in the word flood and the word wood. End rhyme, the most common type, is the rhyming of the final syllables of a line, like in the previous example of crocodile and Nile. Feminine or slant rhyme applies to the rhyming of 1 or more unstressed syllables, such as dicing and enticing. Identical rhyme employs the same word, identically in sound and sense, twice in rhyming positions, like when Isaac Watts ended 2 of his lines from the earlier example with me. Internal rhyme is when a word from the middle of a line is rhymed with a word at the end of the line. Masculine rhyme describes those rhymes ending in a stressed syllable, such as hells and bells. It is the most common type of rhyme in English poetry. Monorhyme is the use of only 1 rhyme in a stanza. Forced or pararhyme is an unnatural rhyme that forces a rhyme where it should not otherwise be. For example, most of you will think that nothing rhymes with orange. The famous rapper Eminem vehemently disagrees and has forced orange to rhyme with many other words in his songs, like the following lines from Business. Set to blow college dorm room doors off the hinges, oranges, peach pears, plums, syringes. Alliteration or head rhyme. This one is also self-explanatory. The first syllables rhyme. The careful cat burglar crept through the corridor. There's usually a pattern in poems with rhyming schemes, such as ABBA, ABBA, or CD, CD, CD. The individual letters represent lines that rhyme with each other. Up next, we have alliteration, assonance, consonants, and onomatopoeia. Assonance and consonants are similar to rhyme, but they're not quite the same. Because this is English, there's no black and white definition or categorization of these terms or of alliteration. Should they be categorized under rhyme? Depends on who you ask. Encyclopedia Britannica defines assonance as the repetition of stressed vowel sounds within words with different end consonants, as in the phrase quite like. Consonance is the recurrence or repetition of identical or similar consonants, specifically the correspondence of end or intermediate consonants, unaccompanied by like correspondence of vowels at the end of 2 or more syllables, words, or other units of composition. All of that mostly means that consonance is related to alliteration. Listen for the repeated L sounds in Emily Dickinson's poem 315. Your breath has time to straighten, your brain to bubble cool, deals one imperial thunderbolt that scalps your naked soul. Onomatopoeia is the term for a word that has been created to articulate a sound, such as thunder or the tick-tock of a clock. Using onomatopoeia is a way for a poet to use more sounds in their poems. All right, this is probably enough for one video. Remember, the form of the poem describes the overall patterns, the number and/or length of lines, the stanzas, etc. The feet tell you how many patterns of syllables are within a line, and the meter is the rhythm of the words. Thanks so much for watching. We hope this video on structural elements of poetry leaves you prepped and empowered.